Well, let's dive in and take a look at the weather forecast for the final week of April. Joining us here, our good friend Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien, as we dive in and take a look at how things are shaping up for the week ahead. Eric, always great to catch up with you. Hope you had a good weekend. And, a few things of note in my mind here when it comes to weather. Obviously, looking at these planting windows, but very cold to start off the week. It sounded like it could be cold across much of the country for pretty much the whole week ahead with some frost potential out there as well. So let's kick it off there. What are you kind of seeing here when it comes to the cold weather?
Yeah, well, the weekend was pretty raw across much of the Midwest. We had a big system that went over the Great Lakes and Ontario, and behind it, we just got trapped into the cold northwest flow. And so, what we had last night was a big frost of, excuse me, Sunday morning, big frost event in Kansas may have hurt the winter wheat crop. And then you notice over the next 7 days, and this, of course, includes this morning's frost, but it's getting down there pretty far south in the Tennessee and Ohio Valley. And we just got this colder air that's trapped into place. So there's going to be some frost damage reports that come out today over what happened in parts of Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, that particular spot. And we're just not breaking fully away from this cold pattern throughout the rest of this week. Now, while we're getting tucked away in this cold air, I mean, the West is going back over quite warm. We're going to see some pretty rapid snow melt in the West as well because of that. And the pattern's just going to favor a lot of heat West and cold East as we finish up this month of April. So what a wild ride April took us on, right? I mean, we saw just brutally cold start, then huge warm up after Easter that lasted 10 days. And here we are back talking about frost again. And the unfortunate thing is this is probably going to cost a lot of the crop that was able to get out and emerge. We're going to see some replant because of it. Yeah. And I don't like talking about frost after such a good warm time period, but there we are.
I was going to say, I was wondering how much of this crop going to be impacted and have to think, especially some of that crop that has emerged. What about some of the crop that hasn't quite emerged yet? Should that still be okay if we're still under the soil, Eric?
I think beans will fare better than corn. Just talking to a lot of farmers and agronomists and just people that understand this way better than I do. And what I've learned is that, if that bean has not yet, just started on its way to popping out, then it can handle the colder soil temperatures
Mhm.
for a little while. But the corn, as I understand it, if you put water on it and then get it cold, that first drink of cold water is just not good for much of the rest of the crop. So I think we're going to have some concerns. I mean, I would say, thankfully, we don't have much of the crop planted. I mean, there could have been
Mhm.
so much more planted, but I think we're going to see some replant out of this, which, of course, it's just more work, burns more fuel. It's just something we don't like to see.
Definitely. Well, you mentioned drink of water. I know we're looking for quite a bit of a drink of water in the southern plains. Are we gonna get any rainfall in some of those driest areas of the wheat belt there in the southern plains, Eric?
Yeah, I think it's good to make sure people know that aren't in this area what you mean by dry and what I mean by dry too. Because if you look in parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, even Nebraska, getting into eastern Colorado and Texas, that southern central plains area, there are some places there that have not measured rainfall more than a half inch in 200 days. You then look at the statistics and we find that it's drier there than it was in 11 and 12. It's drier in that little pocket, especially in Oklahoma, than it was in the 1950s and 1930s. So here we are watching this system come through tonight over the Rocky Mountains. It's going to put snow on the front range and it's going to come out into eastern Colorado and Kansas and Oklahoma. Maybe Oklahoma picks up an inch and a half of rain out of this. And I say Oklahoma as in almost the whole state has a decent chance at more than an inch of rain. What I don't like is on the northern side of that, into Kansas, we saw the models kind of trim away the heavier precipitation amounts. But that rain then gets into the mid-south, really more of the lower Mississippi basin, and then soaks the East Coast later on this week. We will have a system rolling through here in the Midwest, but it's not a major precipitation maker. But why we will not get a lot of work done despite the drier outlook, even though there's some precip in the Midwest, is this just too cold. So I'm happy to see the moisture. I would have been much
Mhm.
happier if you and I were talking about this not on April 24th, but on March 24th. That would have made a difference. But on March 24th, we were talking about a severe weather outbreak in your backyard. So
Yeah.
it's been a rough year this year and a very tumultuous spring.
It has been a tumultuous spring so far. So my question to you is we've talked about tight windows, tight planting windows here the last month or so, Eric. What are we looking at as we get into the month of May? Are we going to see windows open up for us to get back out there and try to get this crop in the ground?
The key is going to be California, right? If you want a thing to watch the weather in California. They're hot all week. Once we get out there into the beginning of May, maybe May 1st through the 4th, those 4 days, watch the temperatures in California. If they start to drop, that means the upper atmosphere is in a trough over that particular region, which means a ridge builds in the midsection of the country. We need ridges. Ridges bring in the heat. They bring back in the accumulation of the GDDs. Unfortunately, you drop troughs in the west. It also tends to open up the Gulf when we get storms out of it. But that's spring, right? We actually need that moisture, even though it chases us out of the fields. I'll just make this statement of what I'm thinking right now. Let's call it May 3rd through the 5th, that time frame. I think we're going to see folks going hard May 3rd, 5th, all the way to about May 20th. I see windows opening up. They're short, but they are there. And when the opportunity is ripe, we're going to go after it, because I do see warmer conditions coming back in at that time. And that's going to help things out. So there's some positive spin on that. But you know what happens when we plant all this crop in a compressed window? It all goes through the stages at the same time. And we've had this happen in the past, but we just get worried like, hey, we're all forecasting a decent summer, but if that 2-week window is not decent, we could really ding this crop. We can't predict that out this far. It's just something we worry about until it actually happens.
Eric, how about South America? What is the latest down there, especially that safrinha corn crop in Brazil?
So I was looking this morning at some of the NDVI imagery, and high NDVI imagery or high NDVI values represent healthy crop from space. So I picked off 5 states from Mato Grosso through Mato Grosso do Sul down to Paraná, Sao Paulo, and Goiás. That's a heart of their growing area. I just listed off roughly 80% of their growing area for safrinha corn, and it's the highest NDVI values we've seen in 20 years. So given that, we expect the safrinha crop to be large. If there is something to know, I think it's off by about 2 weeks. It's later, but they're not struggling for late season moisture on most of that crop. The only place that's struggling for moisture is parts of Argentina, but that's been an ongoing story, and I think it's played out fully in the markets at this point.
Fantastic. Eric, before we let you go real quick, any other final thoughts you want to share with us for the weather this week?
Yeah, well, it's not just this week. It's from now all the way to September. All right, we've got right now. NOAA's updated their forecast for the risk of El Nino to 83%. Many of us can make an argument that the atmosphere is already behaving in El Nino-like ways. For most of us, we would look at that and say, historically, that's a good chance for having less heat risk in the middle part of the country. Doesn't mean it won't get hot, but less of a risk of it, and better chances of northwest flow and storms. So generally speaking, El Ninos tend to give us better chances at trend yields or better. So the continuation of that, plus some new forecast graphics from NOAA suggesting that if there's drought development, it's going to be in the far western plains or down into the southwest, or possibly in the northwestern United States. We have to look at that and see some a good outlook. But I'll be honest with you, until we get there, we've got flooding up north, cold air that's trapped in place for the next week. So it's another one of those weeks where I feel like we're just sitting on our hands waiting to really go after it. So there will be a lot for you and I to talk about in these coming weeks and months, man. This is going to be an interesting year. But that's why we do this, right? Something new and fun, exciting to look at every day.
Exactly. And that is why we do that. And we appreciate your time and analysis as always. And folks can sign up for Eric's daily weather newsletter on our website. The link is there, markettalkag.com. Eric Snodgrass of Nutrien, always a pleasure. Have a great week, sir. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, sounds good. See you then.